Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Why don't we get started, and we're going to start with introduction of today's speakers. My name is Tom Pollard. I'm the Vice President of Product Management for Verimatrix. Verimatrix is a leader in revenue security solutions for pay TV operators and video service providers worldwide. During the remainder of today's webinar, I will have the opportunity to further expose you to Verimatrix and to our revenue security solutions. Avni, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Tom. I'm Avni Rambia. I'm a principal with the digital media team here at Frost & Sullivan. We cover video processing and content protection solutions, among other markets, and I'm looking forward to sharing our insights and findings on the challenges and opportunities that OVPs and video service operators have as they grow and expand their multi-screen and TV everywhere offerings.
Great. Thanks, Avni. And Jeroen?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. My name is Jeroen Kok. I'm the marketing manager of DVTEL, and DVTEL is an independent video systems integrator based in the Netherlands. What we do is we design, build, and maintain video delivery solutions, and we've been doing that for more than 20 years. Our solutions optimize the business case for video providers worldwide, and as a system integrator, we've helped our customers from moving from analog to digital, from linear digital to interactive, over the borders of their own network, to any device at any time. Back to you, Tom.
Great, thank you. So first, some housekeeping items for the remainder of our webinar. We strongly encourage you to ask any questions at any time during the webinar, and we will try to answer them during our Q&A at the end of the session. To ask questions, just type your question into the Q&A widget located to the left of the presentation window. If we can't get to your question in the time we've allowed, we will do our best to follow up with you following today's webinar. Make sure you check out the resources related to the topic on the Resources widget. You'll find a white paper produced by Frost & Sullivan detailing all the research we are discussing today, as well as a white paper from DVTEL called Managed OTT Video Security, and an overview of the Verimatrix Multi-Rights OTT solution for multi-DRM. Also, at the end of the session, you will be asked to complete a survey. We would really appreciate your feedback on this survey to help us ensure that we are giving you the information that you need. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to hand over to Avni, who is going to set the stage with an overview of the OTT industry today.
Thank you, Tom. So if we look at pay TV services today, and also if we look at online broadcasting and online video services, we're seeing TVE, TV Everywhere, and OTT achieve parity with managed distribution in terms of the importance they have towards revenue growth as well as long-term viability. Over 2.5 billion new connected devices were sold in 2015 alone. We're seeing year-on-year doubling, tripling of many metrics in terms of viewership and actual consumption. Even as conventional pay TV numbers start to plateau and fall gradually, we're seeing tremendous growth in penetration of online video and OTT services. A lot of times we're seeing greater investment, greater speed of investment and higher speed of innovation in OTT. 4K did come to OTT first this year, over 1,000 new channels on Roku. The customer acquisition costs for online services are also lower than conventional pay TV. So the numbers tell a compelling story of opportunity and of growth. But as this competition intensifies, there is tremendous urgency to roll out services and to roll them out quickly. Delivering secure content to unmanaged devices is a hard problem on its own. Achieving consistent cross-device content experience adds a whole new dimension of complexity. And let's look at some of the aspects of this complexity on the next slide. We're seeing that OTT target devices form a fragmented and a very messy ecosystem, really. While some primitives are consistent in terms of the codecs or the encryption formats, the bulk of the porting and the integration has to be done device by device, model by model. And that creates a tremendous amount of engineering complexity, also testing and customer service complexity, and it creates long-term complications in terms of how you deliver consistent security and consistent user experience across all these different types of devices and then across all the different types of platforms in play with them. We've seen with the rise of HTML5 as a standard with the growing proliferation of Dash that there are attempts at standardizing this, but the effect from an end-to-end perspective is still very far from being realized. So right now, as you're trying to roll out multi-screen services across all these different types of devices, you have to deal with different types of browsers. You have to deal with choices of browser-based or app-based playback. You have to deal with the individual characteristics and the individual capabilities of every platform. The platform encompassing the chipset and any hardware tools available there, the operating system, the user experience libraries, the particular browser version. And then you also have to look at which types of streaming protocols are supported, which types of key servers might be available, how all that connects to your back-end server in terms of the entitlement management. And then you have multiple DRM systems as well. There's PlayReady, Widevine, Verimatrix, Marlin, Apple's Fairplay, and others. And there are one-to-one bindings between browsers and DRM systems, particularly in the HTML5 context, that all have to be managed. So we're looking at tremendous opportunity, but we're looking at it in the face of incredible fragmentation. And how to manage all of that while still growing and competing and delighting customers is the challenge that video service operators are facing today, and that OVPs are increasingly helping them solve. Tom, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Abney. I think that really sets the stage for the remainder of our webinar. And I think this next slide sets the stage to really start to drill down with regards to the fallacy of free and whether DRM truly is free or is not free. So I guess with that, I would ask you maybe to proceed with some further research on the topic.
Sure thing. Thanks, Tom. So one of the things that we saw as we were analyzing the DRM market this year, particularly in terms of pricing and revenue trends, is a growing perception that DRM is essentially becoming free. And there is reason for that perception. Widevine, which is growing tremendously in terms of footprint and reach, is not sold on a licensed basis. And PlayReady has also been lowering its rates in terms of title-based royalties as well as client-based royalties over time. Marlin, of course, is theoretically free as well. The important thing that we ask people to realize is that you're really only talking about the DRM core when you're having this conversation. So Widevine or PlayReady or Marlin, even Verimatrix, are essentially the cryptographic core that enables the rest of the secure content to be processed, but it's far from being the only component that processes it. So you typically have a client that sits and wraps around the core, which is doing the actual authentication, which is implementing all the checks. And then you have a secure player that wraps around that, which is leveraging the entire platform and is checking the entire platform as it's fulfilling its responsibilities to play back the content in accordance with a specific license policy. So you have authentication, user-specific encryption, you have content-specific encryption, you have rights definitions and restrictions enforcement. If a client were to be broken or if an underlying DRM system were to be changed, you have to deal with revocation and renewal. You have to manage all the keys and licenses on the back end. You have to send them to the client. You have to interpret them correctly. You have to be sure that the trust transactions are being tightly enforced and continuously maintained. You also have to look at forensics, watermarking, trader tracing, things like output control and link protection. All of these vary significantly from device to device, platform to platform, and they also vary from DRM system to DRM system. So when you're talking about implementing a secure player and when you're talking about implementing the server architecture that sits behind that service, you have to look at all these different aspects. And often, when you have a free DRM core, you are looking at somewhat higher expenses on these surrounding components in order to get to your final secure player.
Yeah, and so, Abney, I think that definitely, I like this slide and I like your overview because it does a good job, I think, of illustrating all of the complexity surrounding that core. A couple things that, from a DRM perspective, that I guess I'd like to drill down a little bit further on, based upon our own experience here at Verimatrix. You mentioned watermarking, and increasingly watermarking is a requirement of the content owners for both video on demand, particularly with ultra-high def or 4K content, but also increasingly for live content where the threat is live redistribution, particularly of premium and quite expensive sporting events. And watermarking is not something that inherently is provided by the DRM core that's provided by a company like Microsoft or Widevine. So that's an additional level of technology that a security provider needs to supply. Another thing I guess that I'm not sure if was highlighted in the diagram is jailbreak and rooting detection. It is proven that Android devices, for example, that have been rooted, that the video is vulnerable to being intercepted. Again, this is a level of security that the DRM provider needs to provide and is not provided by the DRM core from a Widevine or a PlayReady or other. And one other thing I guess I'd like to highlight, and this is one of the challenges we've seen at Verimatrix, is we've all seen that password sharing is a threat to revenue security, and that username password is not really sufficient for security and is increasingly not accepted by the content owners. So we at Verimatrix, for example, use device-based security, and that means we need to uniquely identify devices, and that can be a challenge across the various DRMs. So these are examples sort of at the DRM level of the type of technology that needs to be added to the DRM core to really provide sort of a secure solution. I think if we look at the player level, maybe Jeroen, maybe you might have more insight in terms of some of the additional layers of technology needed beyond the DRM core itself.
Good point, Tom. Well, looking at the hardening of the player or at the hardening of the device, as a system integrator, we see that the end-user device is one of the biggest drivers of new updates and releases in video delivery platforms. Consequently, you need to have a mechanism as an organization in place that really anticipates these changes in order to successfully adopt a release, support or add a new device or new feature, including content security. Looking at our own organization, we have a mechanism that consists out of efforts that need to be performed in order to minimize the area of vulnerabilities. And we deal with this by, for example, having a dedicated focus on new ecosystem releases, professional procedures and processes, really build on best practices in order to be as effective and efficient as possible. But also things like automated testing solutions that help you in order to keep up with changes without losing things like scalability. For example, we have a test room here, physical in the office, where you just can connect a new device to the system. It runs a predefined script with all kinds of variables, and it does perform such tests continuously and super fast. It's actually really cool to watch. And it results in a detailed report highlighting all things that have gone well or didn't go that well. So this is just from our experience, things you need to take care of while looking at hardening the player.
Then, of course, it's important to remember that that intricate jigsaw puzzle we saw is repeated over and over again for every brand, every model, every platform that you need to support with your service. In 2015, we saw nearly 1,300 brands, close to 25,000 Android devices alone, and more than 100 different versions of browsers, including versions and variations. So that's the kind of combinatorial nightmare you're looking at as you develop and test and, more importantly, maintain your secure players and your services over time. HTML5 was expected to provide some uniformity and sanity, especially the notion of just writing the player once in a script and having it run consistently over time. That hasn't quite materialized yet. we tend to see that different browsers and different DRM systems do behave differently on different devices. And so the service has to be cognizant of those differences and handle them appropriately. Apps do remain an important alternative today, and we expect that to remain so over time. You also still have a mix of legacy formats such as mode streaming, HLS, and HDS. Even as the Netscape plugin APIs are being deprecated, the growth of more modern apps and more modern infrastructures is time-consuming, and it's difficult to roll out at scale. So you have to manage all those different complexities. You have to manage the different versions of OSs, browsers, DRM cores. Those can change on you, often without warning, especially if you're building this in-house and you're not fully plugged in with the different stakeholders and the different standards bodies. It's also difficult, and I'll let Verimatrix speak to this more, but it's difficult to have consistent write expressions from system to system to manage different types of license and key server architectures from system to system. And so we find that close to 3 out of 4 video service operators begin very confidently with iOS-based secure player development, and we'll get through a few Android models, but then very quickly switch to a commercial DRM system, simply so that they don't have to deal with all that in-house.
Let me sort of jump in there, Avni. I think everything you said is true, and I'm sure that Jeroen can probably testify to the challenges of dealing with all the number of devices and OSs, et cetera. One thing I sort of want to amplify is the browser question. And of course, part of the rationale for a multi-DRM solution, like the one that Verimatrix offers, as well as others, is to support the various DRMs that are native within browser environments or certain device environments. But one of the things we're seeing is that there's a challenge supporting all those browser environments, and in some ways we're seeing a bit of a pendulum shift away from sort of the siren song of quote-unquote free DRM and free native player support in the browsers, and more towards a downloadable application approach. And there's a lot of reasons why people are starting to move back towards that paradigm, even for PC and Mac. Partially it has to do with the dependency on the browser providers. When they change the rules, as we've seen with NPAPI and other plugins, that causes chaos. Of course, the silos themselves. I mean, at this point, Chrome only supports Widevine, Edge only supports PlayReady, etc. That causes complexity both on the player side and on the back-end side. We've seen security issues with sort of the native playback experience in certain browsers. And I think the other driving factor that we've seen is that for premium content, the content that people would be expected to pay for and that where you would need to apply DRM, operators would like to maintain a better differentiation, a better user experience, and a more consistent user experience across device types and across OSs. So we are seeing sort of a bit of a shift back towards an application-centric model that customers are used to, for example, in the iOS and Android space. It doesn't mean that a multi-DRM solution isn't required. There is value in some cases for native playback, and there are some device types where that is your only choice, where you have to accommodate the DRM on the device. But as I said, we're seeing sort of a bit more of interest lately in an app-centric model, which would allow for some consistency of DRM as well as consistency of playback experience. I guess, Jeroen, maybe you can comment more on sort of the challenges from an OVP perspective for supporting all the devices.
Yeah, we definitely can. We do see things moving back and forward. And indeed, there's a huge fragmentation driven by new end-user devices, browsers, all kinds of new devices in a short amount of time. But also the fact that we haven't been distributing video over unmanaged network for a long time. So it's also driving the fragmentation. And the fragmentation seems to be a formula, like the different kinds of mobile platforms times the number of devices, media formats, bit rates themselves, different kinds of DRM and security layers. And in order to solve these challenges, As an independent system integrator, we created a kind of a best practice in the form of a OTT delivery platform blueprint, which is a architecture or a design based on a couple of learned lessons. The first one is, in our architecture, we work with a unified service delivery platform to enable the unified UI, like the user interface and the user experience, the functionalities, the features. But also you need to have a multi-DRM support for the different kind of browsers, Chromecast, Apple TV, Android, but also the game consoles. You need to have the ability to adopt or migrate existing technology. And last but definitely not least, you should always enable a unified user experience. A nice example of these lessons learned we found at a customer. It also relates to what Evnie just told us. We were asked to adopt a new kind of device, which they were not able to do so themselves due to limitations of the existing platform architecture. And eventually, by using our OTT blueprint, we found that we could reuse pretty much the entire architecture they already had, because we only needed to integrate a different client player in one of the devices, and also in the platform and DRM in order to adopt the new device, and also the required video features and user experience. But I do agree that fragmentation is, it is interesting.
So we've looked at the magnitude of the fragmentation problem. The implication of that is it's very hard to maintain consistency of service amidst fragmentation. And more importantly, it's difficult to maintain the highest level of user experience consistently across devices. If you have an in-house architecture that's not agile enough, or if you're not able to fully fund all the updates and all the changes required on an ongoing basis for your entire support matrix, it's not like you will interrupt service or you will break a device. In the vast majority of cases, you have softer fails in terms of going back to lower resolutions or not being available in certain use cases. You may just be available in the browser or whatnot. The challenge is if you have a competitor who's far more agile and who can deliver a higher quality experience on your device, you will fall back from a competitive perspective, and consumers and subscribers jump services very easily in this world. So that's the other aspect to keep in mind, is how easily can you provide consistency amidst this fragmentation. I'll hand it over to Tom now to show you the back end that needs to be maintained in order to provide this agility over time.
Great. Thank you, Avni. So what you see depicted on this slide is sort of the analog to the slide that we showed earlier that was a bit more focused on client-side technology. This is a DRM backend. This is the VCAS Ultra with multi-rights OTT solution, which is really the set of server-side DRM license servers and rights management, which ensures and addresses the consistency of delivery and consistency of rights management and business models that Avni referred to previously. Just to dig a little bit deeper, if you look at the three boxes sort of in the center, you see license servers coming from Widevine, coming from Microsoft with PlayReady, and coming from Adobe for Primetime. And these are third-party DRM servers that need to be, we take the SDK, and those have to be packaged into products. They're not products off the shelf from those third-party suppliers. But importantly, there's a whole lot of additional logic to the left of those license servers which really add the rights management of the DRM. These servers ensure that only entitled devices are allowed to view specific content. These servers allow for the definition of a household. For example, we could define that a specific household or a specific subscriber is entitled to view a specific asset or a package of assets across all of their devices and all of their DRMs. And the real objective is to simplify the life of the operator and abstract the underlying DRM complexity and allow the operator to work in the subscriber management and billing system realm. So sort of analogous to the DRM core that we talked about earlier on the player side, the license servers can be considered to be the DRM core on the server side, but all the rest of this logic is required for an actual pay TV system and gets to the heart of the discussion with regards to the investment required to build a DRM system end to end. Jeroen, I suppose this is just part of the equation for an OVP. There's a whole lot of other components that this DRM system needs to integrate with in the head end, correct?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. In order to have a look at these components, let me just move ahead to have a look at this OTT blueprint I just mentioned. There it is. What we're looking at right now is a version of our OTT video delivery blueprint, and you need an entire architecture in order to be able to have a true consistent TV everywhere experience, and it really requires more components than we just discussed. But yeah, you're right. You need to take more elements into consideration. In order to move beyond the managed network, there's the video processing element you find on the left. And what it does is it transforms and prepares the existing video content into the right format for the devices you require. And here you also find video encryptors like multiplexers or packagers, on-the-fly packagers, that also relate directly to the DRM and the hardening process. Then, of course, there is the service delivery platform you find on the top. It's called the Unified Middleware, but of course it's a service delivery platform, or SMS, Subscribers Management System, which is managing the subscriber database, or CRM, the entitlements, which are very important, and also it communicates to the BSS, the billing support systems. Of course, there is also the content delivery network itself and the management of the network to enable the distribution of the content to the end user device. And here you already see that all these components form an ecosystem that allows a consistent and unified user experience across devices. And all of them need to be taken into consideration when hardening the security of the entire ecosystem. To give a real-life example, besides the video encryption by the DRM, we also verify that only authorized end users are able to consume the content using a token authentication between service delivery platform and the CDN, just as an extra security layer to minimize the vulnerability. So here you see that there is really more to it, hardening the entire process and ecosystem.
So I think we're starting to appreciate the notion that DRM is really not a project. This is a program. This is a long-term undertaking, and it is one that is central to the quality and the competitive strength of your video service offering. We wanted to take a minute to look at the findings we had in terms of the actual costs upfront in terms of CapEx and then ongoing in terms of testing and maintenance over time. We see that the upfront cost of initially deploying a player port varies from $100,000 US to $250,000. This is per platform. So some are a little bit simple, some are a little bit more complicated. You're then looking at about 20% of that cost repeated year over year in order to upgrade and test each individual player. The model that you see to the right is a combined model of the client development costs, the client maintenance costs, also the server development and maintenance costs. So you'll see that it does vary cyclically year over year. In the initial years that you're doing the rollouts, your maintenance costs are relatively low, but over time, those will start to add up and become very significant. I do want to call out two caveats here, and there are two ways in which we've idealized this model. The first is that we're not looking at any disruptive circumvention events, in that if there was a systemic breach of any of your deployments or any specific model, or if, let's say, a certain tablet was recalled, or if a certain streaming media device suddenly became extremely important, you would see a spike in unexpected CapEx and OpEx in that particular year. And it would be disruptive almost always to the other tasks that you may have planned, because OVPs and video service operators typically do not have large banks of surplus engineers who are skilled in secure player and secure server implementation. Their core competencies tend to be end-to-end workflows or content service management. So that's one. If you have an unexpected breach, or if you have an unexpected new device, or if you have to suddenly accelerate the rate at which you're rolling out players, this model can change very quickly. The other thing is this assumes that the project goes perfectly. Those of us who are developers and project managers know that it's very rare to find a project that proceeds exactly as planned and is finished within the expected schedule and on budget. So if you were to account for risk factors in terms of, you go down a certain path, you realize it's not working, you have to re-engineer it, you may have loss of talent, you may have other interfering priorities. By the time you account for risk, by the time you account for potential project overrun, and by the time you account for opportunity cost in terms of potentially lost revenue if you don't have a perfect implementation within the time frame that you had expected to have one, these costs can increase by a factor of anywhere between 1.5 to 4. So as you are planning to resource and to staff your secure playback and your secure server infrastructure, it's important to keep these things in mind. On average, and we'll see these numbers in more detail in subsequent slides, but on average we find that OVPs and video service operators are needing to spend anywhere between $1 million and $1.5 million a year in developing and maintaining their clients, and the upfront costs can become much more significant if you want to accelerate the rate at which you're rolling out services. So in year one, if you wanted to cover 40 devices and you wanted consistent services across all of them, and if you needed to support all 5 major DRMs on the back end as a result of that need, then your first year and second year costs will be significantly, significantly higher. The other thing I want to point out here is if you have a dollar to spend, the question is, do you want to spend it reinventing the wheel, or would you rather spend it on a commercial solution where the vendor specializes in these products and moreover can amortize their R&D costs over multiple customers? So there's an opportunity cost involved, there's a long-term commitment involved, and going back to our discussion about consistency across devices over time, this is where the rubber meets the road. If you're not able to fully commit to developing and maintaining and updating and testing every single platform and every single player over time, this is where you're going to start to slip in terms of the competitive strength or the user experience. But Tom, do you have additional perspective to add?
Well, I think I can give some specific examples of the sorts of things that are often forgotten when when companies try and set up a DRM system. And what we typically see or often see is that someone will set up say a play-ready license server, and they will use fixed key encryption, and maybe that server is suitable to support a few thousand devices. And I think where we invest our energy, and where anybody who wants to run a system of this type will similarly need to invest engineering dollars, includes things like incorporation of new SDKs. I mean, Microsoft doesn't stand still. They send out new SDKs on the server side and on the client side over time. There's investment with regards to integrating those SDKs and taking advantage of the new functionality that they offer, things like key rotation or other business model support. That takes investment. Every time one of our customers wants to support a new device, maybe it's Xbox today or it's Sony PlayStation tomorrow, go down the list, there's some interop that has to be done, and quite often there's some code changes that are required because there's always some sort of client-server interaction that needs to be accommodated. In addition, there's simply new DRM support. You've seen from our multi-DRM solution that we have multiple DRMs in our arsenal, but I'm sure will be new DRMs that need to be added over time to accommodate new device types or new geographies. And finally, I guess I would note, and this is something that people tend to forget, it's one thing to set up, say, a Play-Ready license server and have it functional. It's quite another to have it scale to support 10,000, 50,000, 500,000, a million subscribers. That's a whole different sort of system architecture, redundancy, and reliability engineering that is often forgotten when people do their initial estimates of the work involved and of the maintenance involved. And I think with that, I imagine, Jeroen, you probably have some painful scars with regards to that sort of maintenance and development effort.
Yeah, nice put, Tom, but you're right. We consider DRM definitely not just a standalone project. What we see is that today's video business is really about end-user experience, end-user satisfaction, and for video providers, this is getting quite challenging because support management as a discipline is really growing in complexity, since most video delivery platforms are beautiful multi-vendor, multi-technology, multi-component creatures. And each of these components is susceptible to updates. Most of them are planned, fortunately, but some of them are not. And especially looking at the end-user devices, as we just discussed, you're likely to receive many updates. And the platform as a whole turns into an extremely dynamic and unstable architecture, which is very difficult to manage. For example, I believe that the average video client lifecycle is only about 3 months. So considering the amount of effort it requires to keep up, it's definitely a long-term project or program, as Evgeny just mentioned. And I even believe that it is an ongoing program in order to keep up. And you might want to get it right, because there's always a risk of not having your DRM up to date as it should be. And you also want to prevent delays in launching new services when the marketing department is already launching campaigns in order to attract more subscribers or providing new propositions to generate higher RPU. So it is definitely a program, not just a project.
The streaming media space is always changing. It's changing driven by consumer technologies in terms of increasing resolutions, in terms of more interactivity, in terms of new business models that are demanded by consumers or that are organically created by the industry. So we're looking at, for example, a lot of password-based issues in terms of how services are accessed and how they're monetized. We're looking at quite a bit of geographical considerations in terms of can you use a certain service or can you access a certain resolution with a certain level of security in this region or that. We're seeing quite a bit of excitement around 4K and HDR, and yet we're seeing much of the energy in terms of new deployment go into full HD. And this year we're seeing higher investments in VR as opposed to 4K. The implication of all of these uncertain yet very systemic changes is that a video service operator has to be incredibly agile to make sure that they're taking advantage of new business models as they arise or new technologies or new modalities as they arise. But they do so in a way that gives them access to the most competitive library of content in the most competitive window. And that comes at a cost. It comes at a fairly significant cost if you've chosen to engineer your own systems in-house. And so when you're making a decision up front in terms of how you're going to implement your DRM infrastructure, you're also in effect taking a call on what your trade-off will be in terms of agility and innovation versus expense. As a case in point, we've seen, especially in 2016, a tremendous flurry of activity around the deprecating of older flash, around the deprecation of even smooth streaming, and a very rapid growth in Dash and a proliferation in the HTML5 standard. Even as we're making these transitions, there are interoperability standards closely related to these that are still under development. So encrypted media extension DME is finalized, but CDMI is still in the early stages of deployment, and Wave is still being talked about. So you have companies having to grapple with the uncertainties of all these different technologies. And if you're not closely plugged in with all the activities of with all the value chain participants, with all the stakeholders, it becomes very difficult for you to anticipate what might happen 6 months down the road, because you have to plan for that future today. Tom, do you see that vendors like Verimatrix, who are much more plugged in, are in a better position to anticipate these changes than operators who might be trying to go it alone?
Well, it won't surprise you, Avni, when I say, yeah, I do think companies like Verimatrix are in a better position in this regard. I mean, it's what we do, right? We focus purely on one thing, and that's securing content or securing video service revenue. And I think, the previous discussion we had was a bit about the investment with regards to building these sort of solutions. But I'd like to spin this around and look at it, and I think you touched on this, on competitiveness. The better your technology, and in this case, the better your DRM or your security, the more competitive an operator or a video service provider is apt to be. And this manifests itself in multiple ways. First and foremost, with regards to the content that the operator can offer. A substandard DRM system is going to result in lesser content licensing rights, and a premium solution will allow the licensing of the top content, ultra high def, HDR, 4K content, and that ties in directly to the bottom line of the operator. Similarly, we see the early release window restrictions from content owners based upon the DRM in use. And again, if an operator wants to build their own DRM solution, it's potentially they can build something that's functional, but are they going to get the release windows that will make them competitive versus others in the industry? So these are the sorts of things that an expert or a company that's focused on DRM or security brings to the equation. And I guess the question that has to be asked is, can an OVP or can an operator compete effectively with a home-built DRM solution, or are they better off leveraging a solution from an industry expert where the investment in that solution can be leveraged and utilized across multiple customers in a typical vendor model? And I guess, Jerome, maybe you can have some real-world experience on that.
Yeah, I believe we certainly have some real-life experience here. I really don't think that a video operator can compete with a homebrew solution in the long term, or if there is a growth ambition in terms of more subscribers, more devices. I think that a commercially proven solution or a service provider specialized with video technology and DRM in particular will always be more agile. I think the time to market eventually will always be shorter, thanks to operational excellence, procedures, processes, and I think it should also be much easier for them to scale up in terms of new customers, new devices, thanks to virtualization and experience. If I compare a managed DRM solution such as ours to or DRM solutions I've seen in the past, I think a commercial professional service is always up to date and is well documented. There are always scalability benefits, and the organization offering a managed service enjoys vendor proximity. They get early access to resources and information and testing equipment, which will definitely speed up developments. They probably have available test and development platforms, so they can run tests, do some innovative projects without jeopardizing a production platform. And I think that the most important factor, which is more intangible, is the aspect of experience and knowledge. A commercial organization offering DRM will probably have a wider perspective. They have learned their lessons. And I think my most important message here is that I think that organizations should focus on their core competences and core activities, and that will lead to more agility for all of them.
This slide, I think, is a fairly good landing point for this particular discussion, and I think graphically summarizes a lot of what we've been covering. And I think as stated at the beginning of the webinar, we really wanted to focus on sort of highlighting and educating with regards to the challenges of setting up a premium pay TV service with a focus on the DRM, and really get the audience to sort of think through maybe the ramifications or the level of investment before making their decisions about how to move forward. What you see in this particular graphic is the fact that for any given DRM, there's core technology both on the client side and on the server side, but there's quite a bit more logic and code and maintenance required to build a complete system which is going to pass studio requirements and therefore enable the licensing of premium content. A couple things that I also wanted to highlight that maybe are not captured on this slide. One is the fact that a company like Verimatrix expends a lot of energy and a lot of investment working directly with the studios so that we know their requirements and so that we can stay ahead of those requirements so that our customers do have access to premium content. And I think that's an investment which sometimes is overlooked. And the other thing I guess I'd like to mention, and it's not represented in this software stack here, is anti-piracy efforts. There is an investment with regards to tracking and identifying potential piracy and responding to that. And again, that's a level of investment that I think is often forgotten when people try and stand up their own DRM system. But I think from beyond just sort of a technology perspective, there's sort of an overall hardening of a system to make it sort of production worthy, and I imagine Jeroen probably has more experience in that regard.
Yeah, we do. Thanks, Tom. Looking at the cost from client-side, server-side licensing is usually just like the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot going on beneath the surface. While designing and building a multi-DRM solution requires CAPEX, you need to have the servers, the licenses, other kinds of hardware, a data center, head-end, not to mention geo-redundant locations. There's the initial installation and all kinds of configuration efforts. Backups needs to be put in place. And it also requires OPEX, like maintenance, the setup of development resources, support activities, license SLAs. There's all kinds of documentation and logging efforts. But there's also an intangible aspect like the maintenance of knowledge. Not only do you need to be up to date, you need to send your people to all kinds of courses, but you also need to consider that the knowledge needs to be remained within the organization, which is usually very difficult. So as said, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface that is driving the TCO, and that really raises the question if you really want to make or buy.
Multi-DRM is the future of OTT, TVE. Our best practice recommendation certainly is that in the vast majority of cases, it's strategically and financially more prudent to buy rather than build a multi-DRM component. That way you can focus internal resources on business core competencies and on growth without stumbling on the security piece of the puzzle.
Great. Thank you very much, Avni and Jeroen. I believe that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, and we see that we've had some questions come in during the webinar, which is great. So just give us a moment here to queue up those questions and start to respond. Great. So first, a bit of housekeeping before we start to dig into some of the questions. I would remind you that you can continue to submit questions while we're answering questions. Hopefully our answers won't confuse you and spur even more questions on the same topic, but certainly continue to give us questions, and we'll do our best to answer them in, it looks like, the remaining 10 or 11 minutes available to us. So I'm going to start things off. And we have a question that came in with regards to fair play streaming, and the question was, does Verimatrix support fair play streaming? And I guess I will sort of First, let me start, and it's a good question, and I was a bit lax in covering that. It shows up on the block diagram that I showed earlier with regards to the Verimatrix solution. But one thing about fair play streaming is it's an interesting technology, and I think there's a bit of a misconception. I personally don't consider fair play streaming to be a DRM per se. It is I would summarize it in my words as a key over encryption mechanism that supplements and improves the underlying security for key retrieval and decryption on iOS and tvOS devices and on macOS. But what it's missing is the rights management aspect of the solution. It provides improved key over encryption and security, but still you need the rights management to define which devices are entitled to view that content, what the policies are for viewing that content, and all of the rest of the things that are required by studios. So just I think a nomenclature issue when people say, well, we support fair play streaming and PlayReady. They're sort of different animals, actually. One's a DRM and one is a key over encryption mechanism. And quick answer, or I guess actually the long answer to the question is Verimatrix does support fair play streaming. It's a fairly straightforward adjunct to our own DRM, our Verimatrix VCAS and ViewRight Web DRM, where our technology provides the DRM or the rights management aspect of the solution, and we support the underlying fair play key over encryption utilizing the SDK and the libraries provided by Apple. So I believe the next question I'm going to give to Avni, and that question with regards to Widevine. And so, Avni, here we go. If trends continue, can't we say that in the future we won't need a multi-DRM solution, that Widevine is going to be sufficient to cover everything?
It certainly seems that way sometimes, doesn't it? No, we don't really see that happening. So there is a perception that Widevine is, blossoming into a catch-all solution. It's driven by growth of Android as a percentage of total devices sold and in use. It's also driven by the growing popularity of Chrome. But no, we very much see this to be a multi-DRM world. Certainly in the Apple ecosystem, fair play string protection is important. PlayReady continues to play a very strong role, both in smart TVs, game consoles, and then also on the PCs. And additional systems such as those in terms of Marlin, Verimatrix, a lot of the individual CAS players have their own DRM systems. So Widevine's playing a growing role, but we definitely don't see it being, the one ring to bind them all, so to speak. Tom, do you see something similar from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see the same thing, of course. And right, I mean, the whole point of having a multi-DRM solution is, for better or worse, I suppose it's probably to some extent it's good news, I suppose, for a DRM or a security supplier like Verimatrix. It's a hard problem, and frankly, the fragmentation is not going away. And I think Widevine is sort of the poster child for the fallacy of free. As someone pointed out, actually, during the Q&A, there are certainly licensing terms associated with Widevine, but I think, Avni, your point was that it doesn't necessarily have royalties associated with it. But having said that, as I hope we've illustrated, there's a whole lot of technology that needs to go around that core DRM to make it a functional solution, number one. Number two, sometimes you get what you pay for, and free tends to imply a lack of support. And when you are running a premium video service and you have an issue, you need to have a phone number to call to get it up and running immediately. So that's one of the drawbacks of free. And then to your point, PlayReady is utilized on certain devices and it's required on certain devices. There's really no choice. There's a silo there. And speaking from a selfish standpoint, Verimatrix has our own DRM, which we believe has some very important technical and business attributes, which make it superior in most cases. So, yeah, I don't believe we're going to land on any one single DRM. Thus, the necessity of a multi-DRM solution. Why don't we continue on? I'm going to ask a question of Jerome. And basically the question is with regards to costs of building a platform, such as an OVP or such as Divitel's platform. And the question is, regarding the cost of a platform, how does it scale? Is it based upon the number of end customers? And does this scaling include, does this per customer cost include only the DRM core, or are there other elements involved with the scaling and the associated costs?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Tom. I believe we elaborated a bit on this topic during the webinar concerning the total cost of ownership, saying that there's more beneath the surface than just meets the eye. In terms of scalability, of course, when building a platform, you require a certain amount of hardware equipment, such as servers, rack space. But while you're updating, upgrading, and connecting more and more customers, you need to expand. You need to scale up, and at the moment in time, you will find some limits where you need to add some equipment, but also you need to place load balancers, different kinds of firewall or firewall configurations. And well, in fact, the tangible elements of this platform, they are going to require lots of attention while connecting more customers, while the intangible aspects that are concerned to the TCO, obviously they will also grow, but not as much as the intangible aspects like the hardware. Looking at our platform, it's well, we've got quite some experience, so we can really help the smaller sized video service providers from about 10,000 subscribers. And the platform itself, well, basically it is unlimited in terms of scalability. Knowing that beneath the surface, of course, we need to expand the number of equipment, hardware, and we need to we really need to add more services, and it will cost us more operational efforts, of course. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you, Jeroen. I have another question here for you, Avni, and I think it fits within your expertise with regards to market and industry trends. And the question is, do you think a cloud-based transcode and solution will eliminate the need for multi-DRM solution in the future in typical OTT service deployments?
Thanks, Tom. So I see those two components as complementary. Certainly, the transcoding tends to interface tightly with the encryption, and that happens before the packaging and the outbound stream. So these components work in lockstep with each other. By and large, with the rise of the EME standard and HTML5, there's quite a bit of uniformity already in terms of how the individual packets are encrypted and how they're put together. But we don't really see an elimination of multi-DRM. If anything, that integration becomes even more important that it be done in some kind of consistent way, because the license transaction, the identity management, the device authentication all still happens in the context of the particular consumption platform. So the way that an iOS device will transact as compared to a gaming console will transact as opposed to a particular streaming media device, they all transact the license and achieve their authentication in different ways. And so you still very much need a multi-DRM solution to be there.
Great. Thank you, Avni. We have a lot of good questions coming in, sort of scrambling here to keep up. So next question I'll take. And the question is, can you talk about how Verimatrix differs from or works with OTT platform providers such as MLBAM, New Lion, the platform, Kaltura, etc.? Do they do what Verimatrix does, or does Verimatrix complement them? And I mean, the answer is a resounding, we complement them. These are prime examples of the sorts of service providers or OVPs, depending upon the nomenclature you want to use, that have a choice of whether they want to focus on building a DRM infrastructure and doing all the work that we've talked about in this webinar, or instead potentially focusing on what I would consider to be differentiating aspects of a service delivery business with regards to content management and video streaming quality and content licensing rights and transcoding and all the rest of those things which have a direct impact on user video experience and distribution. So the quick answer is no. These are the sorts of companies we would partner with, and that we would offer our multi-DRM solution to, so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I mean, in case in point, this is the way in which we work with Divitel. And I mean, I don't know, maybe Jeroen, maybe you can step in there. Divitel is a good example of a similar sort of operator.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. Well, from that perspective, I think we're in quite a unique situation, as we're not a real producer of a hardcore service delivery platform or a VOD server itself. We just love to design, build, and maintain an entire platform while also adopting existing infrastructure, so we can help migrate video service providers moving from, basically from the past to the present and the future. And while doing so, you need to work with the best components and the best technology out there. And from this perspective, I think that the combination of Divitel as a system integrator and Verimatrix as a DRM technology provider has worked quite well.
Oh, great. Thank you, Jeroen. It looks like we have run out of time. We still have some questions in the queue, a lot of really good questions, and I am sorry that we couldn't get to them. We will do our best to get to them offline through some mechanism. So again, thank you for submitting those questions. So as we wrap up, I would like to personally thank Avni and Jeroen for their participation in this webinar. I think they really provided tremendous insight from both a market research and an industry trends perspective, as well as from a real-life implementation perspective. A bit of housecleaning, I would like to encourage you to download and review the white papers and the research referenced during this webinar, and that those documents, as noted earlier, are available via the resource widget. I would also note that the webinar itself will be available for later viewing and offline viewing if you'd like to go through it again, or I suppose point your friends to it. Also would strongly encourage you to fill out the survey that will pop up at the conclusion of the webinar. We definitely appreciate your feedback with regards to how we did and how we can do better in the future with this continuing webinar series. And with that, we will now wrap up. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you all for joining.